Hey there, welcome back to my channel. It's Cybersecurity Meg, and today I'm super stoked to be sitting down with not only one of the greatest penetration testers, but also one of my greatest friends, and that is Tiberius. Today we're going to be talking about mainly penetration testing, but I also have some more fun questions thrown in there. I wanted to start off by kind of getting to know Tiberius. I mean, I know you really well, but I know the general public doesn't know you well. So I was curious if you could tell us about why exactly you chose the hacker name or the handle of Tiberius.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very much for doing this. It's an honor. Um, that's a good question because the story really isn't that good. Like a lot of people are like, oh, he must be into Roman history, or Star Trek. And yeah, I like Star Trek, um, but I'm a Picard guy, not a Kirk guy. So um, the main reason I chose it is I just like the name. Like I thought, Tiberius. It's kind of an unusual name, but at the same time, it kind of flows nicely. At least I think. So I I used it as my hacker handle. Obviously, putting a three in there because you have to have numbers if you're gonna be a hacker. But yeah, honestly, that's the main reason. It's got nothing to do with the history or
Hmm.
anything else.
Yeah, I think having the three or any kind of number inside of the handle always just makes you way more elite, as the cool kids say. So I like
Exactly.
it. So who exactly is Tiberius? Like, what do you do within the community? And what are some random facts about yourself that maybe most people wouldn't know?
Right. Well, I mean, in the community, so obviously when I started out, um, I was doing my OSCP about 2 years ago. Prior to that, I'd followed Reddit. I wasn't. I'm more of a lurker on Reddit. I'm not really active. But I was following, various communities like NetSec and Ask NetSec. And when I was doing my OCP, I think there was the OCP subreddit. Someone posted, I think it was Al Hasred. He posted a link to a Discord server and was like, come here, we can all study together. So I joined, and at the time that was called OSCP Prep, and it was pretty small. I think I was like in the first 1,000 people who joined it, and I found some people. We formed like little study groups. We would tackle the labs together. We would like give each other small hints. So I was really actively involved in that while doing the labs, to the point where I think at one point Al reached out and was like, "You're pretty active. Do you want to like be a mod?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." so so I became a mod of that, and then eventually got promoted to admin, with a few other people, and then the community kind of just took off. We obviously it started out as OCP prep, but then a lot of us got our OCP, and it was like, well, it makes more sense to sort of expand it and include other certs. So not just the offsec ones, but some elearn certs as well. And so we changed the server to infosec prep, which is what it is now, with the general goal of being, trying to get people into infosec and expand their careers, and try and help that. So that's really sort of the past like 2 years ish.
Mhm.
But I also, while doing my OCP, I developed Auto Recon, which is a tool that you can use on the exam. That basically just makes it easier to do enumeration, which you have to do. It's I like to fondly describe it as like a really dumb task manager. It doesn't do anything particularly clever. It has a bunch of commands and it runs them when it sees certain services. So it's like that's all it does. But it's nice because it does everything automatically. So people tend to enjoy using that. And at the same time, I guess the other thing I've done that's notable is people were complaining about how OSCP doesn't really prepare you for privilege escalation, even though the exam has three privilege escalations, I think. And so what I did eventually after my OCP, I created two courses which I sell on Udemy to do with Windows and Linux privilege escalation. So they've been pretty popular as well. So hopefully I help some people pass.
Yeah, absolutely. Tiberius the cool kid, it sounds like. So that kind of gives us a general overview of what you do outside of your working hours. So I know you've been in the pen testing kind of role and job for the last decade. Can you talk about your experience a little bit just so that people know exactly, what your normal 9 to 5 would look like, that kind of thing?
Sure. I don't think I've worked a 9 to 5 for like several years. It's like flexible work schedules for the win. So yeah, like I started out. I think it was 2011 um, as a junior pen tester, and so that was more formalized. That was like an office job back in the UK, and it's basically being thrown in at the deep end. Like I had pretty much just graduated university like the year before, and I'd only done 9 months working security research for another company. So I was like, yeah, now I can be a pen tester. That makes sense. So with like almost zero like networking knowledge, I sort of thrust myself into that, and it was like trial by fire. And luckily, I was in a situation where there were a bunch of people I could ask when I got stuck or I wanted to know stuff. So that was good. And that gig lasted about 4 years, during which time I sort of started drifting more towards web app hacking. So when I eventually did switch jobs, it was basically doing web apps almost all the time. Like 95% of my job was web apps. So that was nice, and I did that for 4 years, and now I've switched again to another job where basically still doing web apps. That's kind of what I like doing. It's what I feel more comfortable with. So that's yeah, pretty much my journey has been, from doing sort of almost everything as a junior to focusing more when I got to like a more senior role in specifically web app security. So yeah.
Mhm. Okay, great. Now that we have some credibility to who Tiberius is for anyone who's watching and doesn't know you, and now they can kind of verify that you know that what you're talking about, perhaps we can get into some of the more questions that I think people are really here for. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing most often, whether it's, Facebook, Reddit, whatever, is that there's so many people who are trying to get into penetration testing or some sort of offensive security jobs, and they're really struggling to do so. So, the question I have, and I think a lot of people are interested in, is what encouragement would you give to those out there who are trying to get into their first penetration testing job?
Yeah, no, great question. Don't give up is my words of encouragement. Um, and make sure that this is a job that you're passionate about. If you're not passionate about it, then it's you're gonna have issues. So I think the main thing is obviously there's so many different positions these days. The information security industry is like booming right now. But you have to make sure that you are on top of things. You have to make sure that you're doing the research into what's new. So obviously Reddit and Twitter are great sources of that. If you can follow the right people, if you can follow the right groups, you can stay on top of things. But also there's tons of free resources out there as well, for just learning about cybersecurity. So like Try Hack Me, for instance, is great. If you can get an account on that, even if it's a free account, and start doing things. Same with Hack the Box. Portsfigure Web Academy is another free one. That's obviously more web app stuff. But I think the key thing is, if you're going for an entry level position, then you have to show that you're passionate about the subject, because ultimately you don't have that experience. So you have to show to an interviewer that you'd need to hire me. Like I'm gonna work my ass off because this is what I love doing. And I think people don't put enough like recognition into that as a hiring sort of thing. I think you know you can put, obviously experience is great. Like if you have experience, that counts for something, but passion and knowledge and being able to communicate effectively also counts for things.
Hmm. Definitely. So, kind of to go back to what we were talking about earlier, you mentioned that when you got your first, junior pen testing job, you kind of felt like you were underwater and flooded. So, what would you say to those about people who are in the same situation? Like, how can they overcome that feeling of being overwhelmed, especially when they're new to it? What can they do to kind of get rid of the imposter syndrome and understand that they really belong there?
I think someone asked that question on Twitter, and my response was, "I'll let you know when I find out." Because impo- imposter syndrome in this industry is just everywhere. I get it almost
It's
constantly.
rampant.
It's crazy. I think the problem is the industry is so vast. You'd think, looking at it, like IT itself is vast, and information security is such a small section of that. But there's so many different branches of cybersecurity. And if you do what I recommend, which is obviously follow people on Twitter and follow Reddit subreddits, and read up on things, you're going to have a massive amount of information, and it's not going to be filtered. So you'll you know you'll see things like new Wi-Fi exploits, for instance, and you'll be like, I have no idea what any of that does, how that works, and that's fine. Like I don't either. Like Wi-Fi attacking is not my thing. Um, but and like buffer overflows, I can understand a basic buffer overflow, but anything beyond that, any reverse engineering is like magic to me. So I'm right there with everyone who feels that way. So honestly, I think try and keep yourself grounded, and focus on the things that you do know.
Hmm.
So obviously, you're not going to be a master of all trades in cybersecurity. But you can certainly be knowledgeable about a specific few of them, and that's what you want to focus on. So if you want to do network testing, infrastructure testing, definitely focus on that and focus on learning and read up on that. And then honestly, if you don't understand perhaps web app testing as much, that doesn't matter, because you're not being hired to do that. You're being hired to do internal assessments or red teaming.
Hmm.
So I think it's important to recognize that none of us are masters of everything.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of us who have specialized to the point where, like, I can attack web apps all day if I wanted, but if you gave me a binary to reverse engineer, I would struggle. So yeah.
Yeah, I get that too because I mean, I'm sure as many of the people watching know, Tibs is obviously on the offensive security side and Meg is more on the defensive security side. So obviously I have my own experiences with having the newest, shiniest, latest, greatest thing come out. And it's like, oh man, I should really learn about cloud because everything's going to the cloud. But if you just allow your attention to get spread too thin across everything that's coming out and looks exciting to learn about, then really it just makes you feel more overwhelmed, I think. So, and this is one of the questions I was really looking forward to. What would you say are some of the not so glorious aspects of being a penetration tester? Everyone looks at hacking and penetration testing as being like, oh man, that's the goal. That's why I want to get into cybersecurity, and it's just going to be the greatest job out there. But what would you advise people to know before they actually pursue the field?
Yeah, so obviously it's not all amazing, because at the end of a pen test you have to write a report. And That's honestly the worst part, and there's no such thing as, in my opinion, a good report writing process. Um, Ultimately, it like the way I do it is I tend to write them as I go along, so it's less of a sort of whole massive load at the end.
Hmm.
Um, but ultimately, yeah, it's kind of boring, because you have not only do you have to explain the vulnerability, um, you have to describe how to reproduce it, because otherwise, a customer's just going to look at a screenshot and not know exactly what's going on. A lot of customers these days will want to try and reproduce it themselves. They're tech savvy, so you want to put reproduction steps in those, but you also have to explain how to mitigate it. If you just know how to exploit something, but you don't know how to tell the customer, okay, this is, these are the steps you need to take to make sure this doesn't happen, then the report's useless.
Hmm.
So that's definitely something that's hard, and I think it's just definitely something people need to focus on more of the mitigation side. Pen
Sure.
testers are expected to know both.
Hmm.
The other thing is obviously, doing customer readout calls or meetings. You do need to have social skills. You need to be able to. A lot of companies these days will not just send the report, but they'll be like, okay, do you want to have a call to go through the report? And you'll have to answer questions, and you may occasionally get people from the customer side who are annoyed at something you've written in the report or don't quite understand it, and they need more details.
Hmm.
So that can be sometimes frustrating.
Gotcha.
But ultimately, that's the goal that a pen tester should have in mind is not just to exploit everything, but also to secure everything. We
Hmm.
are we are on that side as well. Like, that's the ultimate goal. We're making recommendations so that the environment can get more secure.
Absolutely. So while we're on that train of thought, what are some stereotypes, if any, that you would like to just kind of take a minute to clear the air and demystify about whether it's offensive security or penetration testing specifically, or about hacking? Is there anything that on the top of your mind is just like wildly and absurdly misunderstood by the general population?
Yeah, I think it's the main one is that, like, we're all antisocial and just
Hmm.
stay in our parents' basements, hacking in like the dark. And honestly, the cure for that is just join InfoSec Twitter. Like, it's the most diverse bunch of individuals you'll ever meet. We have so many
True.
people, and we're all doing different things, and we all have different hobbies. And sure, yeah, we all have this one thing in common. But there's people from all walks of life. Certainly, there are people who are less social than others, and there are some people who are party animals. Um, but like, that's the thing. There's we can't just all fit one kind of, like, I
Right.
don't know, one template, I
Mold.
guess. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. So, what about the term hacker? Are you indifferent to it? Do you care for it? Do you think it has a really bad connotation associated with it?
I like it. I think it's a great word. I think, yeah, obviously it has, unfortunately, a negative connotation because of the media using it. Uh, Historically, like, hacking has been seen as a bad thing. Um,
Hmm.
I'm hoping that's gonna change. I know there's the hacking is not a crime movement, which is great. And obviously, with bug bounties like becoming more prominent, that might be the way that everything is shifting. I think there's always at some point gonna be that whole, it's, hacker equals evil hacker, when not necessarily. A lot of hackers are just people who like to mess around with things and see how things work. And if that involves like breaking them, as long as it's their own stuff, or they've paid for it, that's not bad.
Hmm.
That's just how we do things. So
Right.
I think the term is fine. I think, though, yeah, there's definitely some misconceptions around the term that possibly need to be corrected.
Yeah. And I think one of the big issues with it is that we're seeing in the news all the time about these, whether they're nation state actors or whoever that is hacking, as the news puts it. And then, of course, the general public is hearing, the word hacking or hacker associated with these bad threat actors, but they're not necessarily so knowledgeable about how individuals like yourself and other penetration testers use hacking for good. And they actually discover the vulnerabilities and say to the company, like, hey, this is what you need to do to mitigate it and protect yourself. So I think if there was more awareness to know about the good side of it and the light wasn't shined so heavily on the bad side of it, then perhaps people would understand a little bit more.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Going back to something we kind of touched on a little bit earlier for the people who are watching who are trying to get into their first penetration testing role, what are your opinions or thoughts on the job descriptions that are going around nowadays? Majority of people, when we're looking on Reddit and the various other social media platforms, are very off-put, if you will, or frustrated about the job descriptions that usually have the word entry level or junior in the title, but then they're asking for 5 years of experience and an OSCP and a master's degree. Do you think it's more of an issue of skill set and abilities on the people who are applying, or do you think it could perhaps also be on the employer side with unrealistic expectations?
I definitely think it's unrealistic expectations. Honestly, it just it doesn't really make much sense. I know OSCP is technically described as an entry level cert. I don't think it is. I think it's slightly above that. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's just it is crazy. You can't expect entry level positions to require experience. I understand it if the experience is, for instance, in another area, like as a sysadmin, perhaps, or working in a SOC. Um, but because obviously pen testing is a specialized subject. Like I sort of tripped and fell into it by accident, but that's not what most people are going to be doing. Most people are going to be building their careers up to that point. Um,
Mhm.
However, my advice, and that's something I realized early on, is that what they ask for in experience often doesn't really matter. If a job says 5 years experience and you've got one, just apply anyway, because the worst thing they can do is say no. But I've honestly found people who've done that and it got flagged, and they spoke to them and were like, well, you haven't really got the experience for this role, but we'll give you an interview anyway and see if there's some kind of fit. And they
Mhm.
were able to defend themselves and show that, yeah, okay, the experience isn't there, but ultimately it is an entry level position. I've got the knowledge, and I've got the passion, and these are the reasons you should hire me. So I think people tend to get put off when there's excessive, requirements, especially for experience. But I would definitely recommend applying anyway, because there's no shame in having an application turned down, especially over that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I always try to echo, not just on my channel, but really with anyone I come into contact with who is trying to figure out if they should apply for a specific job or not. I think oftentimes we are just way too harsh on ourselves and we kind of belittle our abilities and our skills, which is normal for human beings to do. But I definitely want to echo your sentiment about just applying, and the worst that can happen is you get a rejection, and it's okay because you'll get an even better job the next time. But one of the questions I was really looking forward to asking, and albeit I already know the answer to it, and probably most of Twitter does, but what is the one offensive security tool that you have in your toolbox that you could not function properly or do your job without? What is it? What does it do? Why do you need it?
I have it set as my location on Twitter. Um, it's Burp Suite Pro. Yeah, I'm a big Burp Suite Pro fan. So what it is, basically, really low level, is an HTTP proxy. So you can set your browser to effectively proxy all HTTP requests via Burp Suite. And it'll show all the HTTP requests that the page does as you're exploring the application, which is great. It's useful. But obviously the keyword in there is suite, right? It's a suite of tools. So you've not just got the proxy aspect. You can send like a request to a tool called repeater, which means you can just make small modifications and send it again completely outside of the sort of usual information flow of the app, and see what that can do. The biggest tool is Intruder. Honestly, it's basically a fuzz tester. So you can select pretty much any part of the actual request itself, and then select different types of payload and send them and measure the responses and search through the responses for things. So that's really good. But the main thing I think that's really advantageous is the scanner. The scanner functionality is a bit like Intruder. It's just really a set of payloads that are then matched to different rules. So it's basically Intruder but with a brain. So it's really useful for finding vulnerabilities really quickly. So that's definitely a major part of it, and obviously the extensibility again. So you can code burp extensions for it, which add functionality. There's a ton of them in the app itself, in what they call the BAP store, like the Burp App Store. It's kind of funny, but you can code yourself one and load it as well. So it's a pretty good tool, and even like I know the free version isn't as good as say the free version of Zap, which is like the alternative. But the pro version is I think only $400 a year. And if you are going to be a serious pen tester or a bug bounty hunter, it's honestly worth spending that money. If you're a pen tester, your company's probably bought it for you anyway. And if they don't, they definitely should, because it's just definitely a tool I can't do without.
Yeah, we've got Tiberius out here recommending Burp Suite Pro to all of his Burp Suite bros. Ha ha ha. That was terrible. So if I took Burp Suite Pro out of your toolbox and forced you, putting a gun to your head, to use something else, it would be Zap, or is there something else that others should be aware about on the market?
Right now, it would be Zap. Yeah, yeah, they're the main two. Um, I'm not I'm not aware of any other ones that at least have the kind of feature sets that both of those do. Um,
Mhm.
the only reason I don't use Zap is mostly there's two reasons. It's not as fully fleshed out as Burp is, and at the same time the UI, it's just, since I've spent the last like 10 years of my life in Burp, the actual flow is just a bit weird to me.
Mhm.
But that's a learning experience. So I have often wondered, maybe I should just do a test with Zap only, and see if I can at least figure most of it out. But there's nothing really wrong with Zap. A lot of the advanced functionality is missing in my opinion, but for most people, Zap will be fine.
Video coming to Tiberius' channel soon, where he tries to figure out using Zap and all the functionalities is equivalent to Burp Suite Pro. So stay tuned
Absolutely.
for that. So kind of getting away from the more tool-oriented or technical questions, what are some changes that you see coming to the penetration testing field, perhaps in the next 5 or 10 years, with everything that's being automated nowadays, with the attacks that are obviously incrementally growing year over year? What do you think is going to happen in the field in the next decade?
Yeah. So obviously, automation is a big part of it. So there's definitely more tools these days for doing like automated source code analysis. Um,
Mhm.
at the same time, there's weaknesses in that. So you especially with web apps, which is what I mostly know, right? So a lot of the time, it's difficult for a source code analyst engine to detect permissions based like authorization issues. So they tend to generally be missed by those kind of things. And that's not really the fault of the SAST engine. It's more the fault that it's kind of a what's the word, like a almost like a second level to an app. So it's not really has anything. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual information flow itself. It's more understanding which users should access which things and defining those properly.
Hmm.
And the other thing is obviously business logic. So a lot of the time, there are the thing you're exploiting isn't necessarily the code itself, but the developer who's coded it. So like the developer missing a step and allowing you to skip over like a multi-step function. Probably not going to be caught by static analysis, but definitely could be caught by a pen test. So I don't think we're going away. At least I hope not. Fingers crossed. Uh, but at the same time, I think the other thing that's going to be happening in the industry is I think more of a move towards bug bounties. There's definitely less of a stigma attached to them now. I know like 5 years ago, it would have been crazy to think that bug bounties would be where they are. But yeah, here we are. There's like three major platforms nowadays: BugCrowd, HackerOne, and Integrity, and they're all doing really well. And you find a lot of companies being pretty open about it. So I think that's definitely something that's going to keep improving, and we might see more people move towards bug bounties, especially.
Hmm. And just kind of while you brought it up, take a little bit of a trail off. What are your thoughts overall on bug bounty programs? There's so many people who reach out to me, which I think is hilarious because I have absolutely no experience whatsoever in bug bounty. Let's just clear that up. And they're like, hey, Meg, if I want to get into penetration testing or any kind of offensive security role, is doing bug bounties, partaking in them, a reliable way as a first step to help me get towards actually having a professional job working in offensive security? What would you say?
I would say absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it bug bounties definitely count as experience. Um,
Hmm.
so if you can, and that this is the problem with it though, is you need to make sure that you can at least share statistics on the bug bounties. Not necessarily what they are, because I understand a lot of the time you can't publicly disclose them.
Hmm.
But if you've got a HackerOne profile or a Bug Crowd profile, then you can at least share your personal stats on what types of vulnerabilities you found. So
Right.
that shows experience, not necessarily like work experience, but the fact that you've been able to find these bugs, report them, get them recognized. So that at
Hmm.
least shows some level of technical skill. And I
Gotcha.
like to say, yeah, bug bounties and pen testing are pretty similar. Generally, the major difference is the customer engagement and the scope. So a lot of bug bounties have these huge scopes, whereas in pen testing it's usually very narrow. And in bug bounty hunting, you really don't talk to the customer at all. You talk via like the triager, or you talk via the bug bounty platform. Whereas in pen testing, obviously you have a much closer customer relationship. So there's definitely some more social aspects to pen testing, I think. On top of that, the recommend making sure you can write good reports really and get recommendations. And
Hmm.
obviously, not being paid per bug is a big one, I guess. So you're sort of doing a trade off there. You're getting a decent regular wage, but your SQL injection will not be worth 10 grand if you find it. So
Dang it. Okay, great. I think that's really helpful and informative for people who are asking that question because there are a lot of people asking that question. So, leading on to what you were speaking about with reports and writing them not necessarily being the most glamorous thing about being a penetration tester, what would you say are some key fundamental elements to include in a report at the end of an engagement? And how did you learn to make your reports as kind of concise and impactful as possible? Like, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously the first thing you have to actually explain what you found and how you found it in language that the person reading the report is going to understand. Now, a lot of the time that's going to be a project manager or a developer or probably both, to be honest. So you can include technical language; they should be expected to understand that. But at the same time, having a good summary of what the bug is, especially what the impact is, I tend to recommend describing the impact in terms of data, like what can the attacker do to your customer data via this, if anything. The other thing I recommend for any report really is reproduction steps. And by that I mean you should, even if it's like three or four like bullet points that say, okay, this is what you do to reproduce this finding. Even if it's complex, like literally requiring them to have burp, like and say open burp, do this, do that, and now you've exploited it. That's fine. Because honestly, a lot of customers I've spoken with already have a copy of Burp anyway, and that they sometimes know how to use it as well, so that's even better. But the main reason I do that is also really just to help yourself, because I'll tell you a story of when I did a test and I wrote up the report, and then a year later the customer came back and we're like, okay, we fixed everything, we need a retest. So can you go and just retest everything you did before and tell us if it's fixed? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I pull up the report and I start going through the issues, and I come across one and I can't figure out how I exploited it in the first place. And it's like I'm trying to rack my brain, think back a year. And from that point on, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put detailed reproduction steps into all of my reports now, just to help out. Just to save that time as well, going back over all my burp logs to try and figure out exactly which request triggered the vulnerability. So that's definitely what I recommend. Screenshots as well are great, and if you can include them, like code excerpts, even if it's for like small HTTP requests that do stuff. So I think all of that is great to have in there.
Fantastic. Now that we all know how to write pen testing reports, I feel much more enlightened. Um, Another really interesting question. So, we all know that penetration testing is generally a really lucrative subfield of cybersecurity to work in. We all know that. That's why some people target getting into cybersecurity or specifically penetration testing. What would you be doing if you weren't working in penetration testing? And if penetration testers didn't make those super large salaries that we generally know them to make, would you still be a penetration tester?
Um, that's a good question. I'm not sure what I'd be doing if I weren't pen testing. I'd like to say bug bounty hunting because that's almost the same thing. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd probably be working in secure development of some kind. So overseeing that kind of thing, making sure that the code that people are writing is secure. Because ultimately that's the same goal. Like I said, the goal of a pen tester is not just to exploit everything; it's to make sure everything gets fixed properly.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's what I'd be doing. If we weren't paid, as well, I'm not sure. The thing is, pen testers are paid because we're supposed to be experts in what we do.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to lie, it's definitely a tricky field. There's definitely a lot of stuff you have to learn. So that's really why we get paid so much. So, like, I'm not entirely sure if there'd ever be a time where pen testers wouldn't get paid. as much, just because the market would
Hmm.
basically dictate our salary. Um,
Sure.
but I think I'd still do it because ultimately it is a fun job. There aren't many downers to what we do, especially when you get to attack web apps all day. It's
Hmm.
definitely a lot of fun.
Great. If there's one thing that you could change about the penetration testing field, it can be anything, whatever you can come up with, what would it be and why?
I think make it more diverse. Um, I think there's this massive problem in pen testing right now, and not just pen testing, but like cybersecurity itself, which is we we don't tend to have we have diverse personalities, but we don't really have like many diverse many anything else that's diverse really. Like a lot of the community is made up of men,
Hmm.
which really sucks because of the few female pen testers I've worked with. All of them were great, incredible, really talented people. And at the same time, having people of different nationalities, of different ethnicities is always good as well. Like I feel like the cybersecurity community is already so diverse in so many ways. Like, why can't we be diverse completely? Like, why can't we just be that? Why can't we buck the trend of tech and
Hmm.
be that one community which is like welcoming of literally everyone and just you know have fun and be respectful. I think that
Right.
would be my main recommendation. I think that's something we really need to work towards as a community itself, and try.
Yeah. Amen. I echo that. So, as we're closing out here, I wanted to kind of do something fun at the end, and I thought it would be cool if we did a lightning round of questions. So,
Okay.
basically, I'll give you two options, and just whatever comes to your brain the quickest is it, and then we'll move on. No discussion or anything. Does that sound
Okay.
good?
All right.
Okay. Okay. So, Wem or Nano?
Vim.
Them. I can't. I always say that wrong. Okay, sorry, I wasn't supposed to talk more. Big Sur or Windows 10?
Ooh, Big Sur.
Windows or Linux?
Linux.
Dark mode or light mode?
Dark mode.
Coffee or tea or energy drinks?
Coffee.
Hoodies or zip jackets?
Hoodies. I mean, come on.
Lights on inside of the room or lights off inside of the room?
Lights on.
Trying harder or asking for help?
Asking for help.
Burp Suite Pro or Zap?
Sap. No, wait. Burp Suite Pro for sure.
Dr. Pepper or Coke?
Coke.
Hack the box or try hack me?
Try Acme.
Chinese food or Indian food?
Ooh, Indian.
Dogs or cats?
Cats.
And best time for hacking, morning or night?
Night. I can't
Okay,
get up in the mornings.
last one, Netflix or Spotify?
Spotify.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Tiberius or Tibs, for being here. Before we kind of end this off, I wanted to see if there was any last message you want to give to anyone who's watching or any one thing that you would like to kind of conclude with.
Yeah, well, just thank you very much again for interviewing me. This has been great. I definitely, obviously, recommend everyone check out Cybersec Meg's YouTube content and her Twitter. And yeah, I think echo what I said before about diversity in cybersecurity. I think it's a really important thing. I think you know this is what people should be working towards, and I hope that we can be that one area of the industry that bucks the trend and starts being more welcoming. Because it's 2021, people. We need to sort of move forward now.
Get it together. Thank you so much, Tiberius, for being here. I'm going to put all of Tib's links down below to his Twitter, Udemy channel, his Twitch, his YouTube, all the Tibs things. So go ahead and check them out.